Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is... What the hell is it? It's Tuesday. All right, it's Tuesday, January 17th, 2023. Like a little disturbed that all of a sudden now I'm staring right at the date, and one of those situations, I'm looking right at it. It's Tuesday. Everything seems to be working fine here so far, so fingers crossed. And I guess if there's any order to the universe, everything will break down today here at KITM World Headquarters, because the news is that everything is back up and running at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy World Headquarters, and by extension Netroots Radio Headquarters. And so we welcome them back live to a broadcast immediately following today's show. Of course, he's been carrying you through with the podcast as best as possible, but finally came through with the new Macintosh equipment, a MacBook Pro, in case you're wondering what they're operating on there. And, well, congratulations. It's been a while. I know it's tough. It was tough to wait for the right equipment to come in. Supply chain something, China. I don't know. We'll just say it's their fault and leave it at that. Okay. Well, plenty to catch up on today. Of course, anything new since yesterday on the George Santos front? Probably. I think just things we left behind on the George Santos front yesterday. Nothing brand new. But, it's a week's worth of material anytime something happens with that guy. And we shouldn't be paying attention to that anyway. We should really be paying attention to the other things happening. Like, for instance, maybe the end of the World Economic Order. That gets threatened every once in a while. This time, of course, we've got a Republican House full of QAnon weirdos. So it's entirely possible. And, of course, no Republican leadership to speak of sitting atop them, with the possible exception, I guess, of Mitch McConnell, who's not actually in the House. He's in the Senate. They can put the brakes on some of it, but, we still need an affirmative passage of certain economically connected bills, budget, well, of course, the debt ceiling hike itself, and who knows what they'll attach it to. So that's the big issue. And I guess I would guess that that's what this headline is about. As I scan the Daily Kos headlines, for instance, I see Kerry Elleveld's headline here: "The Republican Party has left Mitch McConnell. He just doesn't know it yet." And I'm betting that that's what this is all about. By the way, always some odd advertising that, gets the banner space everywhere you go on the internet. Daily Kos not accepted, unless, of course, which we encourage, of course, for you to be doing is subscribing. Why not? All my friends should get your subscriptions, including Daily Kos. But if you subscribe, I don't see the ads. And it's just switched to the much more pleasant retire to Costa Rica in 2023. Wouldn't that be a pleasant thought? But I don't know, some Chinese vendor or another that has all kinds of various materials of questionable provenance, I guess. Just recently, they've been popping up quite a lot frequently. And and I can't tell what that is that they're selling in most cases. And it's almost, I guess they choose these things just to lure you into pressing the button to ask, what the hell is that? But I mean, there's some sort of undergarment for sale that is of such unusual dimensions and shape that it makes me wonder what the hell is, what is this for? I mean, I can guess the shape of the undergarment would lead you to believe ordinarily that it's cut for women, but it includes, and I guess, I don't know what I would say, a secret compartment, not so secret compartment in the front that might lead you to believe it's designed for men, except for the fact that men don't usually, wear their undergarments in that fashion. But okay, I don't know. Maybe you've seen this thing too. It's for, I guess the name of the company is Temu, Temu. The rest of the writing is in Asian characters, whether it's Chinese or possibly Korean, I couldn't tell you. But I don't know. If you've seen the ad pop up, then you know what you're talking about, what we're talking about here too. If you know, I guess. And if you don't know, you're among the millions who have seen this thing 100 times and still don't know what the hell is going on up there. And it may just work. I might have to click on it and say exactly what is this thing that you're selling here. Anyway, I was just sort of curious to see whether Kerry's piece might clear things up about the debt ceiling. If not, we're going to have to get to that through a separate story as preparation for when Joan gets here. Like I said in the Morning Post, nobody knows exactly what happens if you actually breach the debt ceiling and stay that way. We have some guesses about what could happen, including the collapse of the world economy, but that doesn't sound like a very good guess. It may be the right guess. It doesn't sound like a very good guess in terms of explaining to people what that means or what, how it would come to that. And I can't explain it either. So I don't really know for sure. We can make a stab at it. And, like I said, when it comes to not knowing exactly what the hell could happen, you couldn't do better than coming here to Kagro in the Morning show and listening to us not know what the hell exactly is going on. But like I said, also, there's some chance that Joan actually knows, so it kind of blows the bit. But okay. Let's see what Kerry had to say here. The Republican Party has left Mitch McConnell. He just doesn't know it yet, and that's nice. Leaving Mitch McConnell must be a terrific feeling for somebody. Let's find out what Kerry means exactly. Masterful tactician, that masterful in scare quotes, of course. Masterful tactician Mitch McConnell got a lot of things wrong this cycle. Turns out Donald Trump wasn't exactly a fading brand. Indeed, Trump still had the juice to handpick nearly all the Republican candidates in the cycle's most important races. Turns out Georgia GOP senatorial nominee Herschel Walker wasn't the only one who can unite the party, defeat Senator Warnock, and help us take back the Senate. Gosh, someone was wrong about that. And although McConnell was right that the candidate quality doomed Republicans' chances of retaking the Senate, he wasn't exactly honest about his share of the blame for the Senate GOP's horrific state. Okay, slightly different take here than I thought, or direction. First off, if McConnell had convinced just 17 of his GOP colleagues to convict Trump, well, that was a tall order. During his January 6th impeachment trial, Trump wouldn't have wielded so much power over the GOP's slate. That's probably true. But 17, boy. Anyway, second, if McConnell had succeeded in recruiting candidates like former Arizona Governor Doug Ducey or New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, perhaps Republicans' candidate quality wouldn't have been so especially, or rather, epically, that's close looking there, but it is epically, better word, epically dismal. But neither Ducey nor Sununu wanted any part of McConnell's do-nothing caucus, and that's not Donald Trump's fault. The bottom line here is the fact that the Republican Party has slipped away from McConnell without him even knowing it. Trump's power is at its lowest point since he first won the general election in 2016, yet he remains far more powerful than McConnell. The reason is that Trumpism has taken over the party, accounting for its biggest bump in voters, possibly since the GOP tax cutters formed an unholy alliance with the evangelicals back in the late 80s and early 90s. That assertion is just a guess, by the way. It is noted parenthetically. At the same time that Trump brought more voters into the GOP field, McConnell's bread and butter suburban voters have slowly migrated toward Democrats. So although McConnell is still a whopper fundraiser, for the foreseeable future he'll likely have slim to none quality candidates on which to spend his war chest. In essence, McConnell has almost no constituency left, except for a loyal cohort of well-heeled donors who haven't quite realized the once celebrated tactician has lost his grip. Just for kicks, let's take a look at the Civics tracking of McConnell's favorability rating among all voters. It is embedded here. And, where does he stand here? Currently, his unfavorables are 84. So, pretty lousy. What do we got down here? Which line is which? Unsure is 10%. Favorable is just 6%. So, yeah, not great. 6%, yikes. But what about among Republican voters? Well, the story's actually not much different. 71% disapproval, with favorability ratings of just 12%. Again, yikes. Even at a low moment for Trump, some 3/4 of GOP voters still view him favorably. What do independents think of McConnell? I'll let you guess. It's also not good, and it's yikes again. 4% approval versus 85% disapproval. And while we're at it, the icing on the cake, Nancy Pelosi's favorability rating, even though she's no longer Democratic leader in the House, right? Favorability rating, 39% favorable, 55% unfavorable. It's still underwater, but not nearly in the same category as McConnell. So let's see. Despite enduring more than a decade of GOP demonization, Pelosi polls better overall than either Trump at 34 or McConnell at 30, or it's just 6% approval. She also polls at 81% among Democratic voters versus McConnell's pitiful 12% showing among Republicans. But we digress. McConnell may not realize it yet, but the only thing he's got left is his caucus. And that's entirely contingent on his ability to continue to bring in gobs of cash. One has to wonder how long before McConnell's power base collapses entirely. And my guess is not that long, since the debt ceiling confrontation is due up soon. And there's really, little, little chance that he'll be able to seize control of the Republican Party and grab the reins and turn them around and lead them away from economic disaster, which usually is what he's got in mind, although occasionally, certainly he too has flirted with the possibility, but more, I think it was always understood as a threat, but not something that he really wanted to go through with. And now he'll be saddled with a Republican House that actually does have an interest in going through with it, just to see what's going to happen, essentially. All right. Yesterday we were going to read, and today we'll make a point of doing it. House Republicans. I can't even say the word. House Republicans. Ugh. House Republicans prepare emergency plan for breaching debt limit. All right. Well, they're planning, right? So maybe that's a good thing. That's actually a step ahead. So says the headline writer who put the headline on the piece written by Jeff Stein, Leanne Caldwell, and Theodoric. I always love the name Theodoric. Theodoric Meyer. Does he go by Ted? Apparently not. Theodoric. Just says it all the time. All right. The proposal, still under discussion, would direct the Treasury Department to prioritize certain payments if the U.S. hits the debt ceiling. I think we read that subheader aloud yesterday and realized, well, that's the plan usually. I mean, always. Every time the debt ceiling comes up and Republicans threaten not to raise it but eventually do, and I think that those days might be over. But I guess if they hold to the historical pattern, they'll eventually do it, even if they extract something for it. But that's not a Republican plan for breaching the debt limit. That's the administration plan, the Treasury plan for dealing with delays in raising it. It's only a temporary thing that they can do, prioritizing different payments and using cash management the best you can to avoid default. So I'm not certain that Republicans have actually prepared or planned for anything. They just say, use the usual stuff that you use every time we threaten to default, but don't. But use that as the plan for when we do default. I don't know if that's going to work. House Republicans, it says, are preparing a plan to, telling Treasury Department what to do if Congress and the White House don't agree to lift the nation's debt limit later this year, underscoring the brinkmanship. There is no S after the K there. That's the actual word. And it's very difficult to pronounce correctly, I think. It's just one of those words. Well, underscoring the brinkmanship newly empowered conservatives will bring to the high-stakes negotiation over averting a U.S. default, according to 6 people. Well, at least there's a number, aware of the internal discussions. The plan, which was previously unreported because it wasn't very important, because it's not really a plan it's not a plan for after you breach the debt ceiling. It's a plan for before you do. So, I don't know. The plan, which was previously unreported, was part of the private deal reached this month to resolve the standoff between House conservatives and Representative Kevin McCarthy over the election of a House Speaker, who was in fact elected, and it is in fact Kevin McCarthy. They could say so. Representative Chip Roy of Texas, a leading conservative, leading, whatever, who helped broker the deal, told the Washington Post that McCarthy agreed to pass a payment prioritization plan by the end of the first quarter of the year. Okay, that's we're in that first quarter of the year right now. First quarter usually ends around March. Do we have that long on the debt ceiling? I'm not even certain that we do, but I guess we must. Well, must. They could have no idea what they're talking about, but so could I. Anyway, the emerging contingency plan shows how Republicans are preparing to threaten to not lift the nation's debt ceiling without major spending cuts from the Biden administration. What? Okay. How Republicans are preparing to threaten, yes, to not lift the debt ceiling, that's what they're going to threaten, without major spending cuts from the Biden administration. Okay. Congress must pass a law raising the current limit of $31.4 trillion, or the Treasury Department can't borrow anymore, even to pay for spending lawmakers have already authorized. Economists warn that not raising the debt limit could cause the United States to default. It's a could situation. Don't forget that. I mean, that's the most frequently predicted outcome. But all right, that of course could spark major panic on Wall Street and lead to millions of job losses. But who cares about that? Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said Friday that the Treasury Department will begin extraordinary measures next week. So, like this week, I guess. When was this written? This is last Friday. So sometime this week, extraordinary measures will begin to ensure that the federal government is able to meet its payment obligations, but that it cannot guarantee the United States will make it beyond early June without defaulting. So, very long runway here, I guess, which makes sense of the commitment to coming up with a plan, even if that isn't a good one, by the end of the first quarter. I guess if we can't make it past June, well, all right, end of the first quarter is, I suppose, about time that you want to panic and have that plan in place. White House Press Secretary Karine, I don't think I've seen her on television since her appointment, and now I'm unsure of the pronunciation of her name. Is it Karen or Karine? Karine Jean-Pierre. Okay. I remember her appointment, but that's how many White House press conferences I'm watching on TV, by the way, these days. Reiterated Friday that the administration will not negotiate over the debt ceiling. So, okay. Treasury Department aides declined to comment on the GOP plan, because it really isn't much of one. But, why panic people until you absolutely have to? Don't wait. You just wait. Panic them later. And a spokesman for McCarthy did not return requests for comment. What can you possibly say? In the preliminary stages of being drafted, the GOP proposal would call on the Biden administration to make only the most critical federal payments if the Treasury Department comes up against the statutory limit on what it can legally borrow. For instance, the plan is almost certain to call on the department to keep making interest payments on the debt, according to 4 people familiar with the internal deliberations who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe private conversations. That's what default means. Like, if you don't pay, then you're in default. So when we say default on the debt, that seems pretty amazing. So the plan is, if we default on the debt, don't default on the debt. That doesn't really stand as a plan, I don't think. But I guess, all right, technically speaking, you're talking about passing the debt ceiling. That doesn't necessarily mean you default on the debt. It means you can no longer borrow any money. So what I guess what it really means is any cash that you have is supposed to go as a priority to paying the debt so that we don't default, but we don't do anything else either. No money is being spent affirmatively doing anything for the government. It's just asking people, please don't, say we're in default. Here's all our cash. No more, Defense Department, no more paying people any money for anything. Okay, that's going to be a great, what a great plan. Anyway, so wonderful. House Republicans' payment prioritization plan may also stipulate that the Treasury Department should continue making payments on Social Security, Medicare, and veterans benefits, as well as funding the military, of course. Two people said, or two of the people, we don't know who they are, but okay. Such a move would be unprecedented and hugely controversial, and even releasing the plan could turn into a major political liability for the GOP. A hypothetical proposal that protects Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, and the military would still leave out huge swaths of critical federal expenditures on things such as Medicaid, food safety inspections. Who cares about that, right? Border control. That's not an issue, is it? And air traffic control, to name just a handful of thousands of programs. Democrats are also likely to accuse Republicans of prioritizing payments to U.S. bondholders, which include Chinese banks, by the way, over American citizens. How about that? But they'll be saying, well, the border is out of control. Well, you're not paying for any border control. That's why. No, it's because something, open border, yada. Yeah, okay, whatever. I mean, you got a chance to do something, and you're opting not to. So what do we say about that? Well, okay, that'll be the least of our issues at the time, I think. Any plan to pay bondholders but not fund school lunches or the FAA or food safety or XYZ is just target practice for us. Oh, boy. A senior Democratic aide said, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss a proposal that hasn't been released publicly. And that could be either not only the not yet released publicly Republican plan or the not yet released publicly plan for among Democrats to deal with the Republicans and their plan or lack thereof. McCarthy and House conservatives intentionally left the details of the prioritization plan unsettled in their initial agreement, with the understanding that it could take weeks for Republicans to decide which federal spending programs must be protected, the two people familiar with the talk said, and amid uncertainty about the best way to draft the legislation. They really ought to work on trying to figure that out. How to draft legislation. See if we can work it out, guys. The idea poses logistical hurdles as well. In 2011 and 2013, when similar debt ceiling crises loomed, this is what I remember. Treasury Department officials in the Obama administration said prioritizing payments was not technically possible given the complexity of the millions of payments the federal government makes each day. Okay. For the plan to be binding on the Treasury Department, it would have to pass not only the House, but also the Democratic-controlled Senate, and President Biden would have to sign it into law. For the Republican plan to become legally binding, yes. I guess for the Treasury Department to make its own decisions about prioritization wouldn't require any legislation at all. Even if it were enacted, a debt prioritization plan could still jeopardize the trustworthiness of the U.S. government, some experts say. The proposal would call for the government to halt payment for as much as 20% of money that it has already promised to spend. That would be bad news. Still, many Republican lawmakers have long favored exploring these kinds of measures. We should explore this as a way to mitigate the worst economic consequences of breaching the debt ceiling. Two of the people with knowledge of internal GOP planning said the prioritization plan would force Democrats to acknowledge that it is technically possible for the Treasury Department to continue to pay bondholders even if Congress doesn't raise the debt limit. One of these people noted that interest payments amount to roughly $500 billion per year, which can be easily met through federal revenue without additional borrowing. Republicans have explored various ways to push prioritized debt payments over the years. Representative Tom McClintock released a bill in 2011 called the Default Prevention Act that would require the Treasury Department to borrow above the debt limit to ensure that interest on the debt gets paid no matter what. So, that's just called raising the debt ceiling. That version of the plan, however, might not win universal support even among Republicans, some of whom view it as circumventing the intention of a debt limit. It is. It's a good one, but that's all it is. McClintock reintroduced the bill this week because he's such a genius. More than half a dozen Republicans voted against his legislation in 2015. That's not That doesn't mean very much. More than half a dozen. Woo-wee. All right. We agreed to advance a debt prioritization bill through regular order by the end of the first quarter of 2023, Roy said in a text message to the Post. Now, the contours of that were not specified. There are different versions. Grover Norquist, of course he's going to show up in this, founder and president of Americans for Tax Reform, a conservative advocacy group, if you can call it that, said GOP lawmakers have stepped up discussions in recent days over a debt prioritization plan. Then Senator Patrick Toomey of Pennsylvania, now just Pennsylvanian again, I guess, unless he'd stayed in Washington to lobby, proposed a similar idea during the debt ceiling showdowns with the Obama administration in 2011 and 13. At the time, Treasury Secretary Jack Lew said the government computer systems could not be updated to triage tens of millions of payments, arguing that prioritization is just default by another name. Yeah, largely. Republicans said those claims were exaggerated to get them to back off their debt limit threats. The reason you do this is to say, we offered you a bill that prioritized things, and this is what we're getting instead of that, Norquist said. It's being talked about by leadership because it's necessary to be prepared. If you come to an impasse, you want a fallback position. Okay. Whatever, man. I mean, I don't know what to tell you about this. All right. But this does seem to be the same plan, just implemented at a different stage of the game. These efforts are expected to prove controversial, even among some GOP allies. Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. You wonder what they might have to say about this. Well, he said the business group opposes prioritizing payments. How do you like that? Prioritization, he says, doesn't work. We had this discussion a decade ago, Bradley said. And he said even more we'll tell you about after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Well, everything's still good here. I was alarmed. I think I essentially got a thumbs up that everything's still working good on the new computers here, and then realized, we don't have any exchange at this point in the show, so I'm a little bit panicked. But everything is fine. The brakes work normally. Yes, okay. We're back. Welcome back. And now I can tell you about who are we reading about? Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, commenting on the payment prioritization plan put forward, floated anonymously, because they're not ready to announce it yet. Floated anonymously by senior Republican aides in the House, I presume. But not impressed is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that says prioritization doesn't work. We had this discussion a decade ago talking about the 2011 and 13, was that right? Debt ceiling crises in the Obama administration, with Treasury officials saying that this wasn't going to work. And I don't know exactly why it wouldn't work. But I do recall that they said that essentially the plan was or required too much, reprogramming of the computers that handle the millions of payments that the government makes. In theory, I guess, and this is why they're kind of sticking to it. In theory, the idea of payment prioritization, I suppose, could work for a time if you're separating the breach of the debt ceiling from the default on the debt. They are two different events, right? You reach a point at which it is no longer statutorily authorized for you to borrow money on behalf of the federal government for the various things that the government does. But it doesn't mean exactly that there's no cash left to pay interest on the debt, which is the default threshold, right? If at some point you fail to make your payments on your bonds, that's when you are in default of your debt. Okay. Well, at any rate, first of all, we should differentiate those two things. And then, second of all, yes, we have to acknowledge, all right, so a little bit of kinks on first day of the new computers here at the Netroots Radio World Headquarters. But I guess everything is on the up and up now, but I guess we were perhaps delayed in coming back. It looked like everything was still synced, and I don't know whether the stream just buffered and started again later or what, but hopefully there was no drop out of any actual pertinent information. If there was any, I mean, this is the Kagro Morning Show. We can't be sure that the information we were providing you with was actually pertinent. All right, let's get back then to the end of the Washington Post story about what Republicans think they're doing supposedly in preparation for a debt ceiling showdown. So we have the comment from Neil Bradley from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that prioritization doesn't work. If the U.S. government skips its payments to America's seniors or skips its payments to bondholders, both of these things call into question the full faith and credit of the United States government, and our commitment is to paying our bills. And both of them have pretty catastrophic economic consequences. So that's another interesting point as well, right? Even if you do intellectually separate, and even fiscally, actually, make a real separation between, all right, there are two different events, the end of authority to borrow versus the actual default on the debt. Well, if you define default on the debt as being strictly default on interest payments to Treasury bondholders, that's a different thing than saying, I mean, why not define default as defaulting on the debt that the United States government owes to its seniors or its veterans or anyone else to whom it's committed to pass on funding, and they don't do it? That's a default on a debt in much the same way. And I suppose you could choose to see one or the other as more important, but the Chamber of Commerce position is, if you don't pay the people you promised to pay at the time you told them you would pay them, that's default on debt, period. Doesn't matter whether it's bondholders or anyone else. So that's a good point as well. I don't know if that's going to make things better or worse. But it's hard to know whether you can depend on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in this situation, or any situation, really. Some Republican policy experts have become convinced, or have been convinced, such efforts would fail. Brian Riedel, or I don't know, maybe R-I-E-D-L, a policy analyst at the Manhattan Institute, my goodness, studied prioritization plans at length when he was a staffer in the offices of then Senator Rob Portman. Riedel said such a plan would involve lopping off about 20% of federal spending immediately, or about $1 trillion, because revenue covers only roughly 80% of the $5 trillion the government spends each year. Huge numbers of people could be hurt immediately, he said, with no good way to pick between options such as forcing hospitals to deal with the cessation of Medicare payments, or depriving the Department of Defense of funding. How do you make that choice? Well, toss a coin, I guess. Or if you're a Republican, give the money to the Defense Department. Studying this in 2011 convinced us this would be a really bad idea and something we really did not want to happen, Riedel said. We didn't end the exercise saying this is feasible and smart. We said, let's avoid this at all costs because it's going to be a disaster. I mean, that's an important point too, right? Republican approach to this is essentially, well, when we did this to you in 2011 and 2013, you said that as a last, you said you would prioritize payments. So why don't we just say that prioritizing payments is an adequate way of responding to a debt ceiling breach? And the response is, well, when you said you were going to breach the debt ceiling, we said the frontline response that we can come up with, for lack of anything else, and the authority to do anything better, we will try prioritizing payments for as long as we can until the United States economy and then therefore the world economy collapses. I guess you could, I guess it is a bit of a conceit, but I think it might be, realistic to worry that, the world economy could in fact collapse just because the American economy collapses. But on the other hand, I guess at some point you got to wonder whether, all right, well, it means that the United States is no longer the world's leading economy, and that's terrible and will have ramifications for the United States and its trading partners, I presume, for decades to come, which is terrible. But also, I guess there's the possibility that the European Union may say, well, we're now the world's largest free economy, and we'll take the lead. In the same way that they did, or I guess that Europe's leading governments, Angela Merkel becomes the leader of the free world in the absence of an American leader of the free world when Trump was president, because he refused to lead anybody anywhere. So I guess that's a possibility, and I don't know whether that's, that would count as a argument in favor of the Republican approach. They just don't believe that any of this bad stuff will happen and America will continue to lead the world because America is America. And F yeah, we're the best. So, that doesn't seem like a particularly good bet. But I don't know. I have a small bit of sympathy. I can't agree with their policy approach, and I'm generally going to be in disagreement with their ideological approach to almost anything. But I guess there's a certain amount of sympathy, in the same way that I had a certain amount of sympathy for John Eastman with his ridiculous plan, which, in the sense that, well, it's an interesting experiment and an interesting thought experiment and a great way of attempting to, what if we just push through this problem this way rather than that way? Will anybody be able to stop us? Sort of approach to things. But then, of course, when it comes right down to it and you say, well, at the moment, having gotten no agreement from either of the parties that this is or no serious people in either party that this is a feasible way of handling the electoral college count, I guess we'd have to acknowledge that if we can't bring people along with us, then we're standing outside the law as it stands at this point, and we should back off. Similarly, I say I had some sympathy for him because, of course, I had theorized way back when was it? 2016 and early 2017, as the Obama administration was exiting, and we were preparing to swear in a Republican. Was it? Did they have a Republican majority at that point? I can't even recall what the situation was. I guess, but in the Senate. But we were talking about the then pending nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. And how does everybody feel about that one now, by the way? And theorizing that, oh, yes, right, well, between the changeovers between the old Senate makeup and the new Senate makeup, there was that period during which you were working at 2/3 strength in the Senate, and that Joe Biden, then Vice President of the United States, was still President of the Senate, still held the gavel, and had the prerogative of recognition of senators from the floor, and that he could use that power, if he wanted to engineer a situation in which the swearing in of new members of the Senate and reelected members of the Senate was suspended for some time, and that the remaining 2/3 of the Senate, which did constitute a quorum, could conduct business, including the nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, and they could get ahead and go ahead and approve that because there was a substantial Democratic majority among the 2/3 of senators remaining from the prior classes before the new class was sworn in. And because everyone placed such an emphasis on the oath as the measure of whether or not one was in fact a working member of the Senate, or in this case the House. As we found out, all of a sudden all the people who doubted that my theories about the importance of the oath in determining whether or not someone was a member of Congress, one house or the other, they were all of that was dismissed, but then all of that became extremely important all of a sudden again during the speaker fight. Oh, we don't have any members of the House because none of them have been sworn in. Oh, well, that's interesting. That's what I said 4 years ago, and you all said that was crazy. But that's where my sympathy for John Eastman comes from. Basically, even though that was probably true, and it is the case, I guess, and we now all accept that until they're sworn in, they're not members of the House or Senate. It still doesn't follow from that necessarily that others would agree that business could be conducted, especially important business like the nomination to the Supreme Court. But there isn't anything that says that it couldn't be either. And I don't know, how would we all have felt if someone had said, well, that's so outside of our understanding of how government functions that you are guilty of treason, or very nearly treason, since we're not labeling John Eastman. The popular acceptance of the idea that that was treason is still to come, let's say. We predict that for the future when a Democrat does something like that. But you could have brought the same charges, I guess, or said, well, it's sedition somehow for you to suggest that the Senate could have handled Merrick Garland's nomination to the Supreme Court. And of course, there's also the argument that Merrick Garland would never have stood for it himself, which is also a possibility. But, like I said, I don't know that it shouldn't be instantly labeled treason or sedition to suppose that such things are possible. But I guess you could always argue that John Eastman went a lot further at putting that plan into motion than I did. I didn't ask for anybody to lay siege to the Congress in order to make this plan work. Now I know I should have, because apparently there's no punishment for that either. So anyway, similarly, I have a little bit of sympathy here for, even if I disagree, with Republicans who say, well, we don't know. This is one of those gray areas, and people just walk around saying, well, this terrible thing will happen. Why will it happen? Well, because most scholars previous to our day have said that it would happen. Well, how do we know that they were right? Maybe they were completely wrong. Maybe there's a way around this. Maybe they were answering in the context of, well, yes, it will be a terrible thing, and we'll have this default because no one would ever both breach the debt ceiling and XYZ, whether that's the prioritization of payments, et cetera, I don't know. But you say, well, circumstances may be different from the time during which the supposed experts declared that this was the unavoidable result of that. I'm doing something slightly different. That changes the equation here. And we're all answering, we're parroting the answer we got when the equation was different. And that's not really how you approach problem solving in the world. It doesn't work that way. And I can have some sympathy for that. On the other hand, if you were to say that to me, I guess, and I were to have this conversation with you, and you say, well, circumstances have changed, I might say, well, how have they changed, for one thing? And please don't tell me that they've changed in a way that has anything to do with Jewish space lasers or Italian satellites rigging the 2020 election or anything like that. I can't handle that. I don't want to hear that. It doesn't make any sense. And it worries me when you say, well, I've rethought the situation and you've not taken something into account. If that something is Jewish space lasers, it's not going to work. Okay? I just want to say that up front now. If it's something sensible, let me hear about it, I guess. And we can debunk that as necessary. But just because you've factored something new into the equation doesn't mean that that something that you factored in isn't either illegal itself or totally stupid. Let's, at least be aware of that. Well, anyway, all right, back to the more organized thoughts from the Washington Post. Yes, there was the important notation from, who was it? Brian Riedel, now at the Manhattan Institute, used to be at Rob Portman's office, saying, we studied this last time. We didn't say that this emergency plan that they came up with was reasonable and feasible and smart. It was, well, let's avoid this because we don't know how bad this would have gotten if we had to implement this prioritization plan. Michael Strain, an economist at the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative-leaning think tank, you know about them, said the prioritization plan is a live option among some GOP officials and is being discussed quietly. Strain acknowledged that financial markets may not be assuaged by the government meeting only some of its spending obligations, but said that could prove better than the alternative of a default on U.S. interest payments. I mean, I think that's fair to say. If we have a budget deficit of 10%, we should be able to cover 90% of our spending obligations, Strain said. If the National Park Service or FBI don't make the cut before a deal is signed, that'd obviously be better than paying no bills. Other longtime GOP policy hands are more apprehensive. We will see zillions, that's a new number, zillions of ads about this, said Doug Holtz-Eakin, an economic professor, or rather advisor, to President George W. Bush. That's the end of the show. That's the end of no, really, but it's the end of the article. And, you know, another one of those ones that kind of drops off a cliff, but you're supposed to think it's a cliffhanger, I guess. We're just dropping off. We're not hanging onto the cliff. But yes, that's the essential difference of opinion, I suppose. I don't know what else to call it at this stage of the game. I mean, it feels like more than that since the world economy is at stake. But that's basically it. Well, if the United States defaults on any of its obligations, it's in default. And once you start talking default, people start panicking and bad things start happening. And you can explain, I mean, that's another angle on this, right? You can explain to them, no. It's really not fair to say we're in default. In default is something people are thinking of when they think of the federal debt, treasury debt. And we're paying that. So there's no default. Well, there's other people you promised money to and didn't pay. That's kind of default. Well, that's not the sort of default we want to consider. All right. I mean, I don't think that really works. The people who aren't getting paid aren't going to think of it that way. That's not going to happen. And then, yeah, I guess the counterpoint to all of this is, well, remember how, well, this is sort of a sore point for economists and financiers alike, that the financial markets don't always actually factor things in entirely logically or entirely predictably, right? You say, well, we're not in default because we're paying the treasury debt, and treasury debt is what Wall Street cares about. Maybe. But sometimes Wall Street is irrational and stupid and does dumb things like you say, you know, your company makes flying cars that are delivered by other flying cars, but on the internet. Like, that doesn't make any sense, but you have a $15 trillion valuation. And none of that makes any sense, objectively. And people on Wall Street will tell you all day long, it doesn't make any sense, but it's working for now. That, I don't know why, it just is, and we have to trade based on that. That's the basis on which we're working. And I guess it's hard to know. What will Wall Street consider to be in default? And does it matter if everybody has the same explanation, the same definition of in default? And which definition will win if a certain segment of Wall Street institutions decide that they have a different interpretation of what default means? And won't it just cascade from there? Look, I don't agree with that segment of Wall Street, but they are moving their money, and we need to do the same too. Whether I'm right or wrong, I just want to be right or wrong in the same place as these people. And then that's how this stuff starts. And it can collapse or not collapse entirely absent logic. And it's just almost a coin toss as to what's going to happen. But whichever one happens, the side that predicted that was going to be the outcome will be the one saying, see, we know what we're talking about and we're geniuses, when it was really just random garbage anyway. I mean, what happens if the side that believes that the Italian satellites stole the election turn out to be right, not because of any logic or good sense, but because the panicked, herds on Wall Street just head in this direction and might head in the other direction given the same circumstances on another date and time. But, who can afford to find out that the Jewish space laser people are temporarily considered economic geniuses? That might be more disastrous for the world economy than anything else. All right. So, there. I think I've sufficiently panicked you. Whoops. I didn't mean to do that and get that out of the way here. I'm just trying to check in on the various communications channels available to you to change the direction of the show if necessary. And what do we got here? Oh, let's see. Darwin had weighed in with something a little while ago on George Santos. Let's see. I was visited, he says, by the ghost of elections future and was told we should start normalizing the accident of referencing this guy as George DeSantos. What's going on here? A screen cap from the Washington Post, I guess on social media, presumably Twitter. New details link George Santos to cousin of sanctioned Russian oligarch. You might know who they are, Santos added in the company meeting, referring to Columbus Nova. This is InTrader again, right? And his connection to... I saw this billed yesterday as new connections to a Russian oligarch, and I'm not certain... I haven't read through the article yet. I mean, it's the same Russian oligarch and the same connection. It just... in terms of the people involved, it's just what I couldn't tell whether they were just discovering this connection, which frequently happens in stories like this. Everybody sort of thinks they're discovering things for the first time and they've been out there for a while and it's just a matter of I didn't read that article. Or is there some other evidence of connection that's new, but that establishes nothing more than the same connection? Not sure. All right, we'll see if we can check in on that. Of course, also have a reminder here in the KITM hashtag, which is still active on Twitter until the place shuts down. Kate Sherrill passing along the news that I'm sure you've all seen by now too. That just, I guess, is more evidence in the, maybe murdery Trader Green really will, freak out one day and come into the place with guns and start shooting. Because another Republican candidate has actually apparently done that. But, we're gonna like assuage our fears a little bit by saying, well, but he wasn't a candidate for Congress. He was a candidate for a state legislature. So it's okay that a Republican candidate who lost in November in his bid to join the New Mexico state legislature has apparently been involved in a string of shootings at Democratic elected officials and candidates' houses and offices. I guess he was a little upset about losing the election, and it's unclear that he did any of the shooting himself, but the allegation is that he has hired other people to shoot at Democrats' houses, which seems a little odd. I mean, in a number of ways, like, one, losing an election and just shooting at the house of your opponents, bad. Two, some of these people weren't his opponents. It's also a little bit odd. They're just Democrats. Three, this seems like the sort of thing that a tough guy Republican would want to do for himself rather than hiring out for contract work. But there it is. It's actually happening. And let's see. Kate links to the Axios reporting on it. I have in pocket, I believe, the local media reporting on it from the Albuquerque Journal, so we'll go to them. But thanks, Kate, for the reminder that we do need to discuss this at some level here. Let's take a look at the Albuquerque Journal's reporting. Failed Republican candidate arrested in multiple shootings, targeting Democratic politicians' homes. Now that we have the time, we can read the whole headline and get the nuances here. Elise Kaplan, Ryan Bodel, and Jessica Dyer. I hope I got your names pronounced somewhere around correct. This reported yesterday. Albuquerque police on Monday arrested the man they say is the, quote, mastermind, and, again, using the term loosely, behind a recent string of shootings targeting Democratic lawmakers' homes. The suspect, Solomon Pena, I am assuming there's a tilde there and he's a Pena, is a Republican who unsuccessfully ran for office in November and made repeated claims that the election was rigged and appears to have attended the January 6th, 2021 riot in Washington, D.C. So, a little bit of a community danger, if you will. Around 3 p.m., APD's, Albuquerque Police Department's SWAT team swarmed a condominium complex near the Albuquerque Biopark Zoo to execute a search warrant. They made announcements for Pena, who they said may have been armed with a firearm, to surrender as drones flew overhead. Very exciting scene. Within an hour, officers had arrested Pena, who is accused of paying 4 men to shoot at the homes of 2 county commissioners and 2 state legislators. Police Chief Harold Medina announced Monday evening. Investigators also believe Pena was present for at least one of the shootings. Came to check and see, are my contract workers really working? I need to make sure that they're actually shooting into this Democratic lawmaker's home. Again, make sure I get the full clip he's paying you for, kid. Well, oh, no, he must not be guilty if he said clip because it's a magazine. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Anyway, one of the 4 men Pena is accused of hiring, Jose Trujillo, is being prosecuted federally on drug trafficking and firearms charges, but the names of the other suspects were not immediately released. You don't want to unduly tarnish the names of people who have been firing weapons into Democratic lawmakers' homes for hire. That would be just plain rude. We don't do that, apparently. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Everything you ever wanted to know about the guy arrested in Albuquerque for hiring 4 people to fire into the homes of Democratic politicians and elected officials in New Mexico. I guess, there's probably more we wanted to know. Like, what are they going to do with the guy, and when do they bury him at sea next to Osama bin Laden? Well, okay, here's where we left off. Pena ran unsuccessfully in the House District 14 race and claimed on social media he should have won the election. He also visited 3 of the targeted officials' homes unannounced in November, complaining the election was fraudulent and should not be certified. Sounds familiar. APD essentially discovered what we had all feared and what we had suspected, that these shootings were indeed politically motivated. Mayor Tim Keller said at a news conference, they were dangerous attacks not only to these individuals, but fundamentally also to democracy. Quite true. Both Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, a Democrat, and the House Republican leader Ryan Lane, Republican, of course, because he's their House Republican leader, but you know how they do that. Afterwards, they put the R and then say where they're from. Aztec. How do you like that? But House Republican leader Ryan Lane joined the governor then in issuing statements applauding law enforcement and condemning violence. There is no place in our society or our democracy for violence against any elected official or their families, and I trust the justice system will hold those responsible for such attacks to full and fair account, Lujan Grisham said, and I'm sure that they will, but it'll also be dismissed. Note, for instance, we'll see how long we're talking about this guy because, well, it's just New Mexico. He was a state legislative candidate. It's nothing really, no big deal. But then we talked for a week about chalk on the sidewalk outside of Tucker Carlson's house. Or once somebody protested outside of a Supreme Court justice's house and, you know, we need to have federal legislation to deal with this. This guy is actually, you know, essentially hiring mercenaries, a small mercenary army. Remember, he's only operating on the state legislative level. So, a small mercenary army to fire into the homes of Democratic candidates. And it's not even clear whether any of them were, like, did the person who won the election for House District 14 get targeted in this way? I'm not really sure. Anyway, back to the article. Lane, who are we talking about? That's Ryan Lane, House Republican leader in the state legislature, said the New Mexico House Republicans are grateful no one was injured in the shootings, and referenced Peña's criminal past, which had been a controversial issue during the campaign. That's interesting. I'm sure there were several members of the Republican conference there in the New Mexico state legislature who said, yeah, but, he said he's reformed himself. And we need his hardworking solutions for, I don't know, whatever. Whatever the stupid standard lines are. For hardworking New Mexicans, we need his plan for lowering your taxes and killing the people who have different ideas, for instance. Anyway, this is yet another example of a convicted felon unlawfully gaining access to firearms, which they are barred from owning or possessing. That's an interesting emphasis. And using the weapon in a manner that causes public harm, Lane said. So it's one of the few instances in which Republicans are interested in talking about guns and the control of access to guns. Well, we can all agree that we should be upset that a felon has gotten a hold of guns and used them badly, as opposed to, maybe talking a little bit about the fact that the guys who used the guns, yes, they're being prosecuted federally because they're convicted felons and they had guns. But let's talk a little bit about the guy who you were almost ready to welcome into your conference had the election gone differently, hiring these guys to fire at, to assassinate Democrats that bothered him in various ways. That could be an issue. All right, well, let's see. There's another section here. There's a bit more to this article. Dems targeted, in case you hadn't heard. In early January, APD disclosed that it was investigating several shootings targeting Democratic elected officials' homes around the city. They said Bernalillo, County Commissioner Adrian Barboa's Southeast Albuquerque home had been struck by 8 bullets on December 4th. And a week later, on December 11th, more than 12 bullets hit County Commissioner Debbie O'Malley's North Valley home. On January 3rd, shots rang out at State Representative Linda Lopez's home in southwest Albuquerque, and 3 bullets went through her daughter's bedroom as the 10-year-old slept. It's getting dangerous. After the news of the investigation began to circulate, State Representative Javier Martinez, the current nominee for House Speaker, they haven't finished that yet, and the representative for District 11 in southwest Albuquerque inspected his home and noticed that it too had sustained damage from bullets. He had heard gunfire outside his home on December 8th and believes that's when the shooting occurred. Police also investigated gunshots fired near the campaign office for Raul Torres as he ran for State Attorney General and near the office of State Senator Antonio Mo Maestas. But a department spokesman said Monday detectives don't have any evidence linking Peña and his alleged accomplices to those shootings at this time. And that may develop later on. Or what if there are more crazy New Mexico Republicans out there shooting at Democrats' houses that haven't yet been apprehended? Here's an interesting and controversial part of this. ShotSpotter assist on this. ShotSpotter, a very interesting but also controversial technology that maybe they'll tell you a little bit about here. The break in the case came after the shooting at Lopez's home. More than a dozen shots were fired after midnight on January 3rd, and police received a ShotSpotter notification. That's, everyone, I think, do you remember the ShotSpotter system? It's just basically like microphones out there that are supposedly tuned to listen for things that sound like gunfire and note the date and time. And if different locations are able to pick up on it, then you can get an even better read. But essentially, they tell you when and where exactly gunfire has rung out, and if you get there and there's a bunch of casings on the ground and somebody's standing around saying, "My casings, I dropped them," then you have a pretty good suspect for who did the shooting. But anyway, there's a whole controversy surrounding ShotSpotter because, well, for one thing, The algorithm is somewhat questionable and sometimes characterizes things as gunfire that aren't, or sometimes can characterize things that are gunfire as things that aren't. Or, of course, it ends up producing data for you, right? Telling you when and where supposed gunshots rang out. And if the data is subject to any after-the-fact manipulation, then you have an issue, right? If the computer says, look, I heard shooting at 12:01 a.m. at this location, but the crime that you're trying to prosecute took place at 1:01 a.m., if you change the data so that, that the shooting happened at 1:01, that's when you arrested the guy, and then it looks like you have solid evidence that you can maybe use in court to convict the person. But if they ever find out, well, actually the computer says, or the original computer readout says that these shots were fired at an hour earlier, then my suspect was arrested in the area. So maybe that's not actually him. And, but there's been some allegations of manipulation of the data or manipulation of other readout data, like, well, this is something that the computer initially analyzed as something other than gunfire, but it happened at the right time and it's kind of got a bang bang noise. So let's, run it through the algorithm again, wink, wink, and see if we can get it to say that they were gunshots. So anyway, in this case, there actually were gunshots, so I suppose we're all good here. I don't know. But then there was also the controversy of, our microphones only listen for gunshots. Not conversations, but yeah, maybe not. Anyway, you'll hear more about that if you care to look into it. So, at any rate, the break in this case comes after the shooting at Lopez's home. More than a dozen shots fired after midnight on January 3rd. The shot spotter tells him about it. Medina said responding officers found shell casings, but didn't immediately see any damage. They leave little teeny holes in your house. Bullets do. Anyway, I guess they didn't shoot any windows, so they didn't see the damage. The state senator who represents District 11 later reported that a bullet struck the ceiling of her daughter's room. She had awoken to gunfire and felt material falling from the ceiling. Then, 40 minutes after the shooting, Bernalillo County Sheriff's deputies pulled over 21-year-old Trujillo, who was driving a Nissan Maxima registered to Pena, interestingly enough. That's a good one. So, would you please shoot at this person's house for me? Yes, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. Can I borrow your car? Yeah, sure. All right. Bad plan. Deputies arrested Trujillo on an unrelated warrant and during an inventory of the car found 800 fentanyl pills and 2 guns, a Glock handgun with a drum magazine, wow, and an AR pistol. That was probably, the magazine was probably for the drum magazine was probably for the AR pistol rather than the Glock. I don't know if you can make that work. Anyway, hey, too bad about that fentanyl. I think Republicans are supposedly concerned about that sort of thing, but not this time, I guess. The shell casings found outside Lopez's home were tested at APD's crime lab, and they matched the confiscated weapons, police said. So that sounds good. APD Acting Commander Kyle Hartsock with the Investigative Enhancement Division said detectives have electronic and cell phone records, surveillance footage, and witnesses inside and outside of this conspiracy that have helped us weave together what occurred. The persons doing the shootings, we are still investigating if they were even aware of who the targets were or they were just conducting shootings, Hartsock said. He said Pena was at the shooting at Lopez's home and fired at least one of the guns. So I guess he did some of the shooting after all. Okay. Now that's established. Hartsock said the case is still being investigated and additional charges are likely to be filed against other people. What about this failed candidacy? How about some more about what he was actually all about before? Pena's candidacy came under scrutiny over the summer when his opponent, Representative Miguel P. Garcia, Democrat of Albuquerque, filed a court challenge to disqualify him because he had been convicted in 2008 of stealing large amounts of goods from several big box retail stores in a reported smash and grab scheme. That's interesting too, because another one of the big Republican complaints. Crime is out of control. People are doing these smash and grab robberies. Well, you were doing the smash and grab robberies and years ago. But okay, Pena served nearly 7 years in prison, so he did do his time for that, because he's going back now. In September, 2nd Judicial District Judge Joshua Allison ruled that a state law barring felons from holding office unless they are pardoned by the governor is unconstitutional. So, Pena remained on the ballot. Wow, okay. Less than 2 months later, Pena lost the November election by more than 3,600 votes, which is a small number if you're running for Congress, but a large number if you're running for state legislature, I guess. So let's see. He lost by more than 3,600 votes, garnering 2,033 votes to Garcia's 5,679. So that's actually kind of an overwhelming loss. But still, 2,000 people were like, yeah, the guy who's a smash and grab thief from the big box retail stores. And we didn't know this yet, but later he was going to try to assassinate a bunch of Democrats. But still, let's vote for him because we want to cut taxes or something like that. However, in frequent postings on Twitter, Pena maintained that he didn't lose and that the election was rigged. That seems unlikely. I mean, he really got clobbered. On November 15th, Pena posted a photo of himself wearing a red MAGA sweatshirt, Make America Great Again sweatshirt, that appeared to have been signed in gold by Donald Trump and said, "Trump just announced for 2024, I stand with him. I never conceded my HD 14 race." I know, but you should have. Now, researching my options. And one of the options apparently is you could just go and kill all the Democrats, I guess. He also posted a photo of himself that appears to be from Washington, D.C. that said he was, quote, that he said was, quote, one of the last pictures I have of the Jan 06 trip, which I guess we're supposed to take to mean January 6th. In a reply to someone calling him a criminal on December 28th on social media, Pena said, "Everyone in the New Mexico government who helped overthrow Trump are the active treasonists," that's a nice word, "who must be placed in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for natural life." He's got a real flair for writing. "Once they are gone, I can work on rebuilding Albuquerque by killing everybody." On November 17th, in response to a tweet by the New Mexico Secretary of State warning against attempts to manipulate the election certification process, Pena replied, "I will attempt to stop the certification of Bernalillo County until a hand recount has been done. It was rigged." Oh boy. All right, next section, early signs. And embedded here, by the way, is, I guess, like Ring doorbell style, video from Debbie O'Malley's house, I guess, of Pena showing up unannounced at her house at some point. For Commissioners O'Malley and Barboa and Senator Lopez, Pena was a familiar face. He had visited each of their homes uninvited in the days following the election. On November 18th, O'Malley, Barboa, Charlene Piscotti, not like biscotti with a Pyskoty, and Walt Benson all voted 4-0 to certify the general election results. Commissioner Stephen Michael Quezada missed the meeting. O'Malley, whose term as commissioner has since ended, told the Journal on Monday that Pena showed up at her home wanting to talk about what he alleged was election fraud, telling her he believed he should have received more votes because he had knocked on many doors during his campaign. So, that obviously results in votes. "He gave me some papers and said, 'I want you to respond,'" she called. She said the packet included what looked like internet information about voter fraud and a letter. She had no communication with him after that. Pena was not hostile, O'Malley said, until he fired at her house, but the encounter was unsettling enough that she notified law enforcement. "I thought it was odd, and he seemed a little anxious to me and a little kind of aggressive, and that put me on alert," she said. BCSO personnel checked on her house but did not see anything, and O'Malley did not think about the incident much until someone shot at her house a month later. Police said Pena was also has a black Audi sedan registered under his name, which matches the description of the vehicle he drove to O'Malley's house in November. Barboa said she had a similar encounter with Pena when he showed up on her doorstep asking her not to certify the election results. I know our addresses are public, but I was a little thrown off because it's not usual for people to come to our door, she said. Barboa said they spoke, and he handed her paperwork similar to what others who are questioning elections have given her and other officials during county commission meetings. The commissioner said she grew worried for Pena during the encounter as she thought he was making illogical claims about the results of his own race. He was just sort of all over the place. The things he was putting together weren't quite connecting or fitting, she said. You can't say because you knocked on 1,000 doors, you know you got 1,000 votes. She said Monday she was pleased that police were able to make an arrest and quell some of her family's fear. Her daughter, she said, had been too afraid to bring her child over since the shooting. I'm hoping today that this is done and that my daughters can bring my grandbaby here again, Barboa said, while choking back tears. She said the ordeal will change the way she lives and she's going to pursue new security strategies for herself and her family. Plus, Barboa said it's distressing that elected officials are now going to have to take steps to shield themselves from the public, noting that the New Mexico legislature has already removed some lawmaker contact information from its website in response. All of that is going to change because of this, and that breaks my heart as someone who believes the public needs access to our elected officials, she said. So, how do you like that? That's a new development / same old thing over and over again, and we all just wait around until somebody actually successfully assassinates Democratic office holders, and then we say nothing. I don't know. Oh, well, hopes and prayers, I guess. Thoughts and prayers, and it's somebody else's fault, I guess. Okay, well, let's see. Another big story today, and we might as well get this one in before we see whether Joan is available, and I have no reason not to believe it, but I always hedge for her because she's busy, and I feel bad that we interrupt her day, especially so early in the morning. But I should stop with that already. This news, and I have two pieces here that I think may be essentially the same approach to or similar approaches to the same thing here. But we'll go with the Washington Post report. But I also have something from Tech Dirt here. Washington Post writes a piece under the title of What the January 6th Probe Found Out About Social Media But Didn't Report. And I suspect it's the same thing in this Tech Dirt piece. The anti-Twitter files, as the writer is calling it here. Let me open up the original. It's Mike Masnick calling it the anti-Twitter files. The January 6th committee report shows how Twitter leaned over backwards to protect Trump and conservatives. So I think two approaches to the same issue. We're going to go, I think, with the Washington Post more generalized write-up of it than the tech-oriented approach here. But I thought an interesting conclusion in the subheader here from the Tech Dirt folks. The January 6th committee report shows how Twitter leaned over backwards to protect Trump and conservatives. They, of course, are asserting that exact opposite, that the Twitter files show that they bent over backwards to protect Democrats somehow. So let's see what the Post is saying here. The House committee investigating the riot detailed discussion in its report, or avoided detailed discussion in its report for fear of offending Republicans and tech companies, sources say. This according to Kat Zakruski, we'll say, Cristiano Lima, and Drew Harwell, the three writers credited on the byline for this piece. The January 6th committee spent months gathering stunning new details on how social media companies failed to address the online extremism and calls for violence that preceded the Capitol riot. I wondered what might have happened about all that. The evidence they collected was written up in a 122-page memo that was circulated among the committee, according to a draft viewed by the Washington Post. But in the end, committee leaders declined to delve into these topics in detail in their final report, reluctant to dig into the root of domestic extremism taking hold in the Republican Party beyond former President Donald Trump, and concerned about the risks of a public battle with powerful tech companies, according to three people. Who are these people? Familiar with the matter, who spoke on condition of anonymity, so we'll never know, to discuss the panel's sensitive deliberations. Congressional investigators found evidence that tech platforms, especially Twitter, failed to heed their own employees' warnings about violent rhetoric on their platforms and bent their rules to avoid penalizing conservatives, particularly then President Trump, out of fear of reprisals. I think we all felt that pretty clearly, and it wasn't until after it erupted into violence that they finally said, well, I guess we have the objective proof we need now to ban Trump from Twitter for the time being until it's bought by some lunatic. The draft report details how most platforms did not take dramatic steps to rein in extremist content until after the attack on the Capitol, despite clear red flags across the internet. The sum of this is that alt-tech, fringe, and mainstream platforms were exploited in tandem by right-wing activists to bring American democracy to the brink of ruin, the staffers wrote in their memo. These platforms enabled the mobilization of extremists on smaller sites and whipped up conservative grievance on larger, more mainstream ones. But little of the evidence supporting those findings surfaced during the public phase of the committee's probe, including its 845-page report that focused almost exclusively on Trump's actions that day and in the weeks just before. That focus on Trump meant the report missed an opportunity to hold social media companies accountable for their actions, or lack thereof, even though the platforms had been the subject of intense scrutiny since Trump's first presidential campaign in 2016, the people familiar with the matter said. Confronting that evidence would have forced the committee to examine how conservative commentators helped amplify the Trump messaging that ultimately contributed to the Capitol attack, the people said, a course that some committee members considered both politically risky and inviting opposition from some of the world's most powerful tech companies, two of the people said. Given the amount of material they actually ultimately got from the big social media companies, I think it's unfortunate that we didn't get a better picture of how Stop the Steal was organized online, how the materials spread, said Heidi Berich, co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism nonprofit. They could have done that for us. The Washington Post previously reported that Representative Liz Cheney, of Wyoming, of course, the committee's co-chair, drove efforts to keep the report focused on Trump, but interviews since the report's release indicate that Representative Zoe Lofgren, a Democrat whose Northern California district includes Silicon Valley, also resisted efforts to bring more focus in the report onto social media companies. Lofgren denied that she opposed including the social media appendix in the report, or more detail about what investigators learned in interviews with tech company employees. I spent substantial time editing the proposed report, so it was directly cited to our evidence instead of news articles and opinion pieces, Lofgren said. That's a reasonable explanation anyway. In the end, the social media findings were included into other parts of the report and appendices, a decision made by the chairman in consultation with the committee. Now, committee chair Benny Thompson did not respond to a request for comment. Thompson previously had said that the committee would examine what steps tech companies took to prevent their platforms from being breeding grounds to radicalizing people to violence. Jamie Raskin, who sat on some of the depositions of tech employees, did not comment. Understanding the role social media played in the January 6th attack on the Capitol takes on greater significance as tech platforms undo some of their measures that they adopted to prevent political misinformation on their platforms. Under new owner Elon Musk, Twitter has laid off most of the team that reviewed tweets for abusive and inaccurate content and restored several prominent accounts that the company banned in the fallout from the Capitol attack, including Trump's and that of First National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Facebook, too, is considering allowing Trump back on its platform, a decision expected as early as next week. Recent events demonstrate that nothing about America's stormy political climate or the role of social media within it has fundamentally changed since January 6th, the staffer's draft memo warned. Social media moderation has become a flashpoint in the states. Both Texas and Florida passed laws in the wake of Trump's suspension to restrict what content social media platforms can remove from their sites, while California has imposed legislation requiring companies to disclose their content moderation policies. So that's of some interest. But the January 6th committee report offered only a vague recommendation about social media regulation, writing that congressional committees should continue to evaluate policies of media companies that have had the effect of radicalizing their consumers. So, anyway, we run into the wall here of our break, but the next section here, the question of, did Twitter give Trump a pass? They certainly did, and for some considerable amount of time, too, and it took actual attack on the Capitol to change that. How interesting. Oh, by the way, more weirdness from Wyoming I can mention in the next segment. Maybe. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We put off the pleasantries for just a second. I got word that Joan is fine, and she wanted to know how I was. This is what that little exchange before. Hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. What are the details of how fine you are? Well, we have time for that.
The details are unimportant.
Okay. All right. Well, part of what will determine how fine any of us really are, the subjects we cover, and the distressing news from Capitol Hill that I guess we're headed into another debt ceiling fight with no obvious answer in sight, but there rarely is an obvious answer in sight, other than raising the debt ceiling or getting rid of it forever. That's the only obvious answer, and we've never done that, so I guess...
well, we have not had it before.
That's true. We haven't gotten rid of it. We just didn't make it.
Getting rid of it is actually less radical than...
I guess that's true.
Breaching it.
Why, if not having
less radical than breaching it.
Yes. If not having a debt ceiling was good enough for the founders, it should be good enough for us. And, by the way, all blame for that falls on the World War I era Congress. Apparently that was their idea, as was cloture, by the way, which is another interesting invention of the progressive Republicans and Democrats at the time, needing an expedient way of stopping people from filibustering the loan of war materials for World War I. It was kind of a big event. I don't know if you guys remember it, but probably read about it in your books. But apparently also the debt ceiling, that was another thing that they said, well, if we're going to be either involving ourselves in war or paying for a war or loaning things to people so that they can have their own war, if we stay out of it, we want a guarantee that, the debt we accrue won't go beyond a certain point. And thus was, I guess, born the debt ceiling. Yes. Now we're stuck with it. And what the hell's going on? Exactly. I read a little bit about it. I'm a little worried, as usual, but...
well, we knew that it was going to be a fight because
the
Republicans have been telling us it was going to be a fight since, September? I think August or September was when I first started writing about the Republicans counting their chickens and saying, we're going to force cuts. And initially they were saying we're going to force cuts to Social Security and Medicare. They've backed off from that just a tiny bit.
Yeah, hopefully. I've seen some people are kind of including that, and it's an interesting reframing of the problem that's following this, I guess, getting them to back off a little bit on threats to Social Security and Medicare. I was just watching people reframe things as saying, well, look, default is when you don't pay the obligations you've promised to pay, and these are things you've promised to pay. It's not just Treasury debt.
This is what we didn't know back when they were campaigning, and it helps explain a little bit why they've been conflating a government shutdown with a debt default. They've kind of got them stuck in their heads together. Yes, we will allow a default. We will breach the debt ceiling. We are willing to do that. We will go there, but we'll have a plan.
Yeah, I don't
know.
And
that plan is essentially a government shutdown, except for everything that absolutely has to be paid.
Yeah, and there's a fight over what that is.
How they do that is nobody knows.
Yeah.
Back in the Obama administration, the Treasury said it doesn't work that way. We can't do that. It's too complex trying to pay for everything we're doing, and we can't just say, okay.
Yes.
We'll follow your little plan. We'll pay veterans benefits. We'll pay the troops. We'll pay out Social Security, and everything else just goes by the wayside.
I guess that was supposedly the plan. What struck me was, well, one, the prioritization plan is usually that's a plan that the Treasury uses when you're approaching the debt ceiling.
And in fact, they're going to start doing that this week.
Yeah. So that will lead, I think, to a couple of weeks of Sunday show complaints. What do you mean this is impossible to do? They're doing it now. Well, it's different when they do it now.
Right, because there is the ability now. There's I guess you would say, the money now. You can shift this here. You can shift that there. You can juggle the books for a few months.
Yes. So there's some cash management that can happen. But then, after a certain point, when you're really talking about...
There isn't the cash to do that.
Well, there's that.
Unless you can issue the bonds and raise the funds. And
yeah, that's the huge problem, and you're up against it there. And of course, there was also, as I recall, the issue of, well, it's not... this is just, I guess, the usual sort of theorizing in the abstract about things, and then you get down to the nitty-gritty of the way things really work. Well, why don't you just stop these payments and make those payments? And it's not like there's a team of check writing elves in the basement of Treasury that just, I'll just write a different name on this check. It's
right.
The number
doesn't work that way. Of course, they think it works that way, or they're pretending they think it works that way.
It works that way at my kitchen table. Oh, boy.
Exactly.
Great. Another one of these people who thinks they're governing the country from their table. But,
so anyway, this was one of the big things in the secret deal that McCarthy has refused to talk about. We don't know if it was part of the 3-page addendum to the rules. We don't know if the 3-page addendum to the rules actually exists. It doesn't matter if it actually exists. The agreements were in place and they're nuts. And regular Republicans have got to be freaking out just a little bit.
Yeah, I guess so. I hope, maybe. I don't know.
I hope they're smart enough to realize that this is absolutely bonkers and hey, you can't do this. You can't do this.
I don't know.
Which turns us to the solution that we would like to see out of Congress, but really isn't all that realistic, unfortunately. At least it doesn't seem like it right now. And that is doing the discharge petition, which you've probably already talked about on the show.
We haven't.
I probably missed it.
No, not today, not for a while. I mean, we've, of course, discussed it in the past. I think everybody kind of remembers what they're all about. But, in the context of this issue, I guess trying to use, the Democratic ranks plus some number of supposedly sensible Republicans to force a clean debt ceiling increase?
Yes.
Versus an elimination of the debt increase. Okay. Out of committee and use that to get around the foot-stamping Freedom Caucus. And the numbers of members of Congress who might be willing to, defy the Freedom Caucus might be there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that the discharge
they're going to be
petition is the way
willing to defy leadership.
That's true. And even if they were, it's a real clunky system when you
It's
really need
clunky
speed.
and it takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
They would have to be getting it ready now. They would have to have the bill introduced just as soon as Congress comes back next week, because they're out this
Yes.
week, because it's Martin Luther King Day.
Days, you know. He's a nice guy. Let's do the week. Yeah. So that certainly could have been something that could have been introduced on day one.
It could have been,
but,
they could have been thinking this is something that we have to prioritize, so let's get it introduced, let's get it to the committee now.
Right.
I don't think that they did that. If they did, they certainly didn't advertise it.
Yeah, I mean, they might not have. They might have done it and not
at
advertised
any
it.
rate,
That's
the
possible.
process has to start immediately.
Okay.
Because of the time frame that's built into how discharge petitions work. 30 legislative days from when it's introduced to when it could ripen to get those 218 signatures on it to say, yes, we are going to discharge. And then there's 9 legislative days after the actual discharge.
Blech.
And this is just, it's legislative days as opposed to real people days.
Oh,
So
yes.
that's at least 2.5 months, probably 3 months. And then there's all of the things that leadership could do to try to block it from coming to the floor anyway. Games that they can play with scheduling stuff, games that they can play by recessing the House, any number of things. So it's probably worth having going on in the background as a contingency plan, but it's probably not going to save us.
Yeah, well, it'll be late in arriving even if it does. But it should start now. That'd be the timing we'd be talking about anyway. The articles we've read so far have said, all right, well, the Republican agreement, whether it's the secret one or some other one, says that they're going to have a prioritization plan ready to go by the end of the first quarter. So that timing would be about the same, but then they would say, well, we have this plan, so we don't need, that's what they would use to prevent Republicans from signing the discharge petition.
Right.
Don't sign, we have a plan.
Covered. We've got a plan. Look, it's a plan.
Look at it. It says right on it.
Plan.
Yeah.
Legislatively.
Yeah.
But the other problem with the discharge petition is that it has to pass exactly as it is. Also in the Senate, where it probably would, but you would have to be counting on 9 Republican senators. New math.
Yeah.
Not wanting to filibuster, agreeing with Democrats that, we can't really let the House be in control of this because it would be subject to filibuster and because it has to pass exactly as it was passed in the House. It can't come back from the Senate with any amendments.
Yeah. Well,
because discharge petitions have to be, it has to go all the way through. They can't do anything that's been sullied by the Senate under a discharge petition.
Oh, okay. So any number of opportunities for slowing it down, creating mischief, etc. But it's not an impossibility. It's a long shot, but even to have the long shot at it, you got to start now. So, okay. I imagine that, that's something they can handle. They'll have to pick a number and hang it on there, but, that they can do. Or they're not going to, I don't know. Was there any, I guess if they're going to go the discharge petition route for this one, the bill that they use for that will be as straightforward as possible. I
think it would have to be.
And
you couldn't do any tricky
to it,
suspending it forever kinds of things.
Or anything other than, the usual traditional route of picking a different number and hanging that on there. And, right. Then Republicans sometimes, traditionally when they've let that go through, that's because they thought, oh, well, this will be great. I can use it against Democrats later saying they raised the debt by X number. Yes, we're used to that already.
Yeah.
But okay. I guess now there's still a pretty significant contingent among Republicans who say, you don't know that the whole world economy is going to collapse. Let's see. And that's a little, a little weird.
It's kind of scary that they're actually doing that.
Right. Yeah, and like I said, I have some sympathy for that.
We told you so.
Yeah.
For weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks in the lame duck session, we told you so, and we said, you might want to deal with this now. But
I guess they did not. They felt like they wanted to try it this way, and now we find out whether or not, how many Republicans truly believe in it. And it is true that we don't really know exactly what's going to happen, but none of the predictions are particularly good. And the best thing I can say is if it doesn't result in a collapse of the entire world economy, it would probably be because the world economy, other world economic leaders would say, all right, enough with having America lead the world economy. From now on, the European Union does it.
Right.
Like they did with, when you found out we're not going to have a leader of the free world be the president of the United States anymore because the then current president of the United States is crazy. Angela Merkel said, I'll
do it.
Right. So then we'll just have, Germany and the EU saying, all right, from now on, everybody bases their currency on the euro and not the dollar.
Yeah.
All right. And then Republicans will say, I don't know, they might say, see, we survived. We're all, living in a post-apocalyptic hell.
Nobody has jobs.
Yeah, right. Right.
Horrible water and breathing pollution, and then planes are crashing together into the sky because there isn't an FAA. And
right. And then, but Eric Prince says, I live in a palace in Abu Dhabi, so I'm cool. And certain other Republicans feel the same way. So maybe they think that's okay. I don't know. It's, what can I tell you? It's very odd. And now we have to wait and see what sorts of maneuvers they make and whether there are any Republicans out there as promised who say, we're for saving the economy, not crashing it. But so far, I don't know who that is. Maybe Mitch McConnell says that, but I don't know if he's got any body on his
Mitch
side.
McConnell started this whole damn thing.
Right. He thought that, no one believes that I'll actually do it. Well, that's true. No one did believe that you would actually do it. But what you didn't count on is dumb people hearing that and saying, well, maybe I really will do it. Mm-hmm. And Mitch McConnell's a rhino and I hate him anyway.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mitch. You did it again.
Right. You didn't count on people saying, I can make default work because space lasers. And, all right. Well, I didn't think that there really would be such people. But, that's kind of what they're depending on. It won't happen. It's not as bad as you think because after all, trust us. We noticed, for instance, that the election was stolen and Italian military satellites did it. And, if we're smart enough to figure that out, we should be smart enough to figure out how not to collapse the world economy, right?
Does Italy have military satellites?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure, actually, and I never looked any further into it than saying, well, they probably didn't steal the election if they have them. So, maybe they use them to predict ski conditions in the Alps or something, but I'm sure they have something militarily speaking. I don't know what, but...
It just occurred to me.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I wonder about that.
Yeah, and I can't go and Google it because it'll just give me the theories about them stealing the elections. There won't. I imagine that if the Italian military has satellites, there's not a site somewhere that's publicly accessible that says, here they are, and here's where we can find them and what they do.
I think you're probably right.
They're probably kind of
probably does not exist.
But I'm not a big. I don't have a real huge memory of the Italian space program, but
get on that, Kagro.
Yeah, I got to check that out. No one even checked to see whether there was one, because that would be considered a huge waste of time, I think, to find out. I'm not saying that the Italian military would be wasting their time with satellites. I mean, for us to find out whether or not they have them. I'm sorry to all the Italians listening.
No offense intended at all.
Terrific food and probably great ski conditions at the moment as well. and they're suffering with COVID the way we are too. So, plenty of sympathy. But I don't think they had time to arrange the stealing of the election. And their satellites, if they have them, and I'm sure they do, were very busy doing military things very efficiently.
But Italy, like the rest of the European Union, would probably be just as happy with the United States if we did not default on our debts.
Yeah, most likely.
So,
right. I think they're rooting for that as well.
The argument on the other side, and one senior Democratic aide told the Post this is great for us. They're going to say, sure, we'll pay the bondholders, but we're not going to pay your Social Security or your food stamps. Yeah, if that argument actually worked with these people, it does not.
What do you know? Are they upset about not getting their Social Security paid?
They don't care.
Be. All right. I see we're talking about Republicans in the House.
This is the miscalculation I think that Democrats and President Biden have been making all along about these Republicans, is that really we just point out to them how unpopular and horrible and dangerous this is, and they'll see reality and they'll back down.
Right, but they see Italian military satellites where there may not be any.
Yes.
I think we're safer talking about Jewish space
political
lasers.
Actors.
Right. And they are insistent that they are. What you guys don't understand is we know what's really going on in the world, and it's you who have been operating under delusions all this time. That's the basic position that they're taking. The election was stolen. Again, the satellites, maybe the space lasers, possibly several other things. Certainly vampires and pedophiles, and basements and pizza places, et cetera, et cetera. And don't worry about the world economy because we actually know how that works. It's you that doesn't.
But just the thought that Democrats can use this politically, and I think that was one of the calculations behind not dealing with it in the lame duck, was that it would be good political ammunition against the Republicans. It would if they gave a damn.
Yeah. That's, I guess that's true, right? Well, if we prevent them from crashing us into default and destroying the world economy, then we won't be able to say they destroyed the world economy. Right. That's true.
That's the next argument.
But think about this. The world economy wouldn't have been destroyed. What about that?
And what about that?
We could have said that was a good thing and we wanted that and they didn't. Now, granted, sometimes you have to see the results in front of you to understand it. But, at that point, I don't know that then people say, well, that is terrible. I'm not going to be able to eat for 2 years. But when I do, I am going to vote against those guys if I survive. Then, I'm going to take it out on the ones who crashed the economy, not the ones who could have prevented the economy from being crashed and said, let's crash it, but let's have them do it. I'm angry about that. We don't like it. All right. Well, that's not necessarily the most effective plan, but I've been surprised by dumber things working out in politics, I guess. But
yeah, I don't know.
It is.
I don't know that there is dumber than this one. I mean, we're really,
I guess not.
Really hitting magnitudes of stupid with thinking that this is something to play with. Thank you again, Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, it was his invention.
He knew it was not a thing to play with, but he thought he could control it.
Right. Not a great bet. So bad news in the offing for that, and I guess nothing comes. He avoids all responsibility.
It finally is enough for Biden to stop. He had the knee-jerk response during the lame duck, saying, what were they asking him about? 14th Amendment or the coin or something.
Oh, okay.
About the debt ceiling. And he just, you can't do that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
and irresponsible. It would be irresponsible.
Oh, all right. Well, it's a thing you say if you're of a certain school.
Or generation,
yes.
or, you haven't paid that much attention to the issue because you didn't have to, because nobody before was there.
Right.
So he's got to get over that.
Okay.
And he's got to be willing to just say, all right, you're not going to have this issue to play with anymore. Gone. Oof. Whether it's the $1 trillion coin, whether it's the 14th Amendment, I don't care what.
Well,
it is within his power to just say, okay, poof, you don't have this to play with anymore.
He has occasionally surprised us with bold steps that we came to think were, just outside of his way of thinking. But this would be a bigger one and a bigger leap than we've seen so far.
It would, except it's not, because it is kind of a made-up thing.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. I see what you mean. All right. It would be a huge thing if this was real. If this were a real thing, then, eliminating it would be huge. But since it was fake to begin with, but yeah,
that's what's kind of frustrating about it. It was completely a political construct in World War I, or not purely political, but it was a thing that they could magic up.
Yeah.
In World War I. And it is a thing that can be magicked away now because it really isn't a thing that is constitutional. There's no thing that says you have to have this.
Yeah. Whereas there are things that say you have to honor your debts.
Right. Like the 14th Amendment.
Yeah.
That says it cannot be put in question.
Yeah, that may be, I imagine, be somewhat more comforting as a fallback than the $1 trillion coin for someone like Biden.
I would think so.
And
although there is a seminar, Columbia and Willamette University Law School are having a seminar next week on the coin. It will feature
It'll be fun.
Stephanie Kelton of MMA. What does that stand for? That's not mixed martial arts.
No, probably not. Modern monetary, maybe. I mean, is MMT is the theory? I don't know.
MMT, yes, MMT.
Oh, okay. But an MMA could be an association about that.
I'm probably just having a, Monday morning thing because it is my Monday morning.
Oh, well, that's MM right there.
There you go.
Monday morning something.
Look for that. They've been announcing it on Twitter. Look for that.
All right.
If you're interested there, you can zoom in and
Columbia and
see what they're
Willamette.
talking about.
What, Columbia University and Willamette University? Or
law schools.
All right. There you go.
So you can learn everything there is to know about modern monetary theory.
Yes.
Modern?
A theory. I don't know what but MMT is the way I usually see it referred to, but who knows? There could be a new thing. But
modern, it is modern monetary theory.
There we go.
Anyway,
okay.
These people will be telling us all about the coin and about the debt ceiling and how it's not really a thing anyway next week, and I'm certainly going to listen.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting. I think if I recall correctly, the modern monetary theory people would be on the side of, the coin is as fake as anything. Don't even do the coin. Just say there's no debt ceiling. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way fiat currency works. That's their thing.
Yes.
But the coin, I would like to see it. I want to see who do they put on it? Like, who can we put on it to anger
George Washington,
somebody in particular? Oh yes, well obviously but do we? I'm trying to think if there's anybody that would be like particularly annoying or triggering to Donald Trump, say, but really we can't let him dictate policy. Washington, it is all right then, but certainly could be. It'd be open for all sorts of interpretations, depending on who you decided to put on there. But okay, so when is this seminar, you say? I'm kind of interested myself.
It is on, let me open up the link where I have it.
Now it's a race.
I think it's on the 8th. No, that's next. It's the 24th, I think.
Okay. Well, all right. Yeah, so they need to move too. And so, all right, we'll know what to keep our eye on when people come back from recess because they need to rest up in case the world economy crashes. I guess you feel like there should be some more of a sense of urgency here, but I guess maybe they're trying to portray that they're somewhat in control.
Well, right now they're saying, yeah, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen.
I guess
okay, so. Fine, it's not going to happen. But it might happen.
All you can do is come back from recess and try to prepare for it. All right, well, obviously this is something we're going to have, an eye on from now through, I don't even know when. They say that the debt ceiling would finally be breached by June or so, and probably no later than that. They couldn't stretch things out. But yeah, I think even to get to June, they have to already implement some sort of payment priorities. That's going to pull the rug out from underneath the post-breach plan that the Republicans have. So that, I guess, figures into things as well. Like, your legislation is useless by the time we get there.
Everything that they have to shift around now is going to change, how the plan could work. So, yes.
All right, another moving part. Okay, thanks, Joan, for putting up with this, and we'll check in with you again as we get closer to the destruction of the world economy. Yay! Okay, blame Mitch, everyone.
Bye.
And Susan Collins. Okay, see ya. Always Susan Collins. You got to have a mention of Susan Collins being at fault at some point if you're talking to Joan. So now, though, time for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The new computers are in place. They're back live. Hopefully everything is working on his end and everything came back online for us. We'll see you again tomorrow.